so few, dare I say, I don't think any young black South Africans have ever been in a place where they're like, I'm a co-founder of $1 billion company. It takes the same amount of energy to do something big as it does to do something small. So you might as well do something big. Rhodes Scholar, St. John's, Goldman Sachs, BCG, 2 master's degrees, Y Combinator, and you still couldn't convince people to part with and now it's gone on to be a unicorn.
It's such a great time to be in South Africa and be building in South Africa. There's so much potential. It's almost like you have the best Lego blocks in the world and you can choose how you want to stack them. And from that perspective, it's really our opportunity in terms of thinking through how we execute towards that particular goal. And so that's very exciting.
Welcome to In This Economy with SMWX and Standard Bank Private, where we unpack the forces driving South Africa's future, one conversation at a time. What does it take to build a $1 billion company, become a standout investor, and shape public policy? All before turning 40. Melvyn Lubega reveals the bold moves, the mindset shifts behind his success, and more importantly, shares his vision for transforming South Africa and Africa's economy. Welcome to another episode of In This Economy, brought to you by Standard Bank Private. Melvyn, welcome, sir.
Oh, so glad to be here.
It's so great to have you here. I feel like we've shared so many experiences and it's quite a fascinating moment to be able to interview you.
Yes.
One thing you put me onto is biography and the importance of reading biographies. Talk me through how you read biographies and why they've been so important to your sensational trajectory.
So one, my trajectory is really a function of those that have come before me. And I think the best distillation of the journey of someone is their biography. And, often people will share their best nuggets and wisdom at the end of their journeys or when they actually are putting them pen to paper. And so for me, the reality is through biographies and books and reading and podcasting more generally, you actually almost get a group of mentors and advisors that you would never have had exposure to because of either they were different era or time or different geography. And so I find biographies are a great way to understand and learn from some of the greats, whether that's in the political or in the business realm. And so for me, it's just about how can I pay different school fees to what they paid? Because the reality is someone lived a very impressive life and they learned things along the way. And just the biography really unpacks that in the most natural way.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, after you put me onto the biographies, I started reading more and more. And what's interesting about it is you get to understand not just someone's decisions, but the context within their life of those decisions.
Critical.
And that's such an important unlock.
That's true. And I think it's also important because not everything will make sense or pattern match to what's relevant to you today. But when you get into that context, you'll be like, I remember that, or I think about it this way.
Yeah.
I think also what I come to appreciate is if you read enough of them, you actually realize that there is also some golden thread between many of the ways in which they approach problems or the world or people or context, to your point.
Is there one that stands out to you that was particularly formative or a recent one that's stayed with you for a long time?
Yeah, look, there are quite a few, and there are quite a few on the turntable right now. But I think one that was very impactful in my life, especially as an entrepreneur, was the hard thing about hard things. So Ben Horowitz, he's a venture capitalist, but was a tech entrepreneur. What I liked about it is the autobiography, so written by himself, and it was just the rawness with which he described the building entrepreneurship journey. I think it's often romanticized, being an entrepreneur, and I think just the rawness of it. It may have helped that each section began with a quote from a rap verse, which almost made it feel like, hey, he's human too. But definitely I found that, especially, I remember reading it when we were starting out our business, we're doing Y Combinator in Silicon Valley. And I remember thinking I'm in this almost US-centric world, I'm an African child, and just the humanization of the experience for me was critical at that point in time. To the point, context matters.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, let's take it back to some of your early formative experiences. We met at St. John's College. Shout out to St. John's College right now. And, that was one of the institutions that's shaped you. What have you taken with you from your experience at St. John's? You obviously serve on the council now as well, where we shared some time together. how do you look back on that experience, and what lessons do you think you took even from those early days?
Yeah, definitely a sense of privilege, but also working towards something bigger than yourself. When you think about St. John's or any institution, is that it was there before you, to be there after you. And so when you're in an institution, it's almost like, how do you not only contribute to it, but also like get the most from it? And I think, growing up in my local government school, it's not that I would have become a recalcitrant had I not gone to St. John's, but definitely just that sense of refinement, gravitas, and I think also the nature of the relationships, the depth of how I matured as an individual, having the discipline of going to a boarding school, and I think just tradition, which for me put me in good stead the rest of my life, more importantly. But I think also just the sense I mentioned earlier of something much bigger than yourself, but also not to, I think, question like what is possible even from where you come from. I remember, we shared an experience in Oxford. I remember when I told guys, hey, look, the person that, built and designed Rhodes House in Oxford actually, designed my school. They were like, in Africa, what? And I think we often discount that. I'm very grateful for that exposure in knowing like what the art of possible actually is.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, you mentioned Oxford. That's another key touch point. Another place where we were together. And
stop following me.
Yeah, who's following who here? Can I get the $1 billion now? Because, what did that institution mean? And were there any breakthroughs that happened for you there? Of course, you found Go1, co-found Go1 quite soon after that.
Yes.
But what changed in your mindset going to a place like Oxford, and what has stayed with you from that experience?
I think a lot. And one about, I think, the interpersonal side of things. I think, my first, so I did the double masters, public policy and technology.
Yeah.
And in my first masters, I mean, there were about 64 of us in our class and about 36 nationalities. And just like, my gym partner back then was like Deputy Minister of Mining of Minerals of Afghanistan. One was advising the Minister of Health in the UK. And just like different perspectives, but you also check what kind of biases you have by virtue of your own context or country, which you take for granted. And I think that was very challenging, thinking about things both at scale, but also testing your own values and principles. But I think for me, the biggest takeaway was also the realization that we have a very good education system in South Africa, like really, really good. And I think we often discount that because maybe like we want Ivy League or whatever it may be. But I think just the caliber of South Africans I met in my time in the UK, and since then, you realize just how you don't need to just really go overseas to actually compete globally or even study overseas. And I think for me, it's also realizing what is possible with the background we have, having grown up in South Africa.
Talk me through, after your Oxford journey, how things move into Y Combinator and the early ideas of Go1, a company now by some estimates valued at $3 billion, $2 billion, who's counting? Because you were very much the finance, actuarial science person at Oxford, maybe spread your wings to some more humanities, social sciences, and then you take a turn to technology. Talk us through that turn and the formative role of Y Combinator. This is a place where some of the most well-known businesses, tech businesses in the world have come out of.
Yeah.
Your Sam Altmans of, OpenAI right now are a key part of that community.
Yes.
Talk me through that, because that's kind of where we start to diverge and we stop following each other to every institution.
You're welcome to come on the journey. There's a lot to be done out there. It's a fascinating one. Speaking about Sam, when we did Y Combinator, Sam was actually head of Y Combinator at the time. I was president.
Did you meet him?
Yes.
You met Sam Altman.
But Sam back then was the president of YC. He was a regular guy.
Yeah.
It was interesting because his previous company, which was a YC company way back when, actually didn't exit for much. It was he felt like he was a failed founder because he didn't get that much from his first company.
That's so crazy.
And so it's interesting that humanation, how quickly things can change, because now he is the guy.
Yeah, absolutely. But also a refreshing lesson that it happens for you when it happens for you. It can be early, it can be late, it can be in midlife. It's
so true. So I just think about the biographies I read. Think about one of the countries that really shaped South Africa, Anglo-American, was technically began, when Oppenheimer was 36. So we still got time, bro. And so from that perspective, it's about realizing that, when it's your time, it's your time. And so thinking about my journey at Oxford and Go1, it was interesting because did I ever intend to be an entrepreneur and see myself in that role? Not necessarily. It was almost a function of following the problems that I had an interest in, and entrepreneurship became the vehicle to solve them. And I think that was very true in terms of the genesis of Go1. And so my co-founder and one of our co-founders, Andrew, was a classmate of mine in my second master's in the education and technology side of things. It was in the college next door to mine, Exeter, on Toll Street. And, growing up in South Africa was so difficult because, I grew up not liking, people from Australia and New Zealand because our sports rivalries, cricket, rugby, and I'm like, this guy from Australia. And he was a sharp guy, smart guy. I was like, So the first term, I think we didn't see eye to eye. But really what it came down to was that common passion of he had come from a background of building websites as a particular business web development agency. And I'd seen the problem in my experience, both as an investor prior, so investing in startups like Go1 and others, and how you found really high growth and very capable founders struggling to hire the right people and upskill them. And even as a management consultant, seeing how many large companies were often bringing consultants to plug a gap that was often a result of human capital deficiencies within their own organization. And so that disjuncture of small guys can't afford it, big guys can't get it right. And somehow I wanted to dig into that a bit further. And that's why I did my master's in that particular field and in technology. And it was a good confluence, I think, of skills. I mean, if you hear the founding team of Go1, it's like, you've got an economist, an actuary, a lawyer, a doctor, and a computer scientist.
Wow.
And so it's like, so it's that different experience. And I think for me, that was so formative because all of us had different lived experiences of the problem, but when we're all right around the solution that was ultimately building out Go1. And so I think just for context, so Go1 today, it's probably the world's largest online professional learning ecosystem or library. So we bring together about 100,000 odd learning resources, courses, summaries from it is Coursera, Blinkist, Harvard.
Bro, you know what brought how big Go1 is home to me? Like you acquired Blinkist, am I?
Yes.
I'm like, I use Blinkist.
Thank you for the support.
Of course. Like, I was like, what? You acquired Blinkist? Like, it's such a part of my life, And that's just one of the things that that's in your ecosystem.
And I think you realize that learning is something that's so universally global, and just one's ability to acquire knowledge. I think one of the insights even from Y Combinator was that your speed of learning is more important than your speed of execution, because your ability to iterate and just being able to listen to feedback and actually incorporate that feedback into what you're building was so important.
Better and better and better and better.
Exactly. Because, we're doing Y Combinator when we probably should have been doing our fieldwork for our dissertations at the time.
I was like, how's Melvyn in California right now? Or Silicon Valley or San Francisco.
But see, the benefit though is, late nights in California was early morning South Africa. So I can still actually call clients and do fieldwork, and then I can still get the full day. But it was a different time.
Just on that though, as we're on the Go1 journey and its impact, personally, like a lot of people may not realize that you are very much in a trajectory in venture capital or the finance world. And so the idea to switch across to tech was not an intuitive thing. And probably the safe path would have been, let me keep the big salary in VC or adjacent industries. And talk us through that decision to leave a lot on the table at the time because you believe that you might really be onto something.
Yeah. And it's you look back in hindsight and you can say, yes, it was the right one. But at the time it wasn't clear, especially because, you'd did particularly well in corporate before I went to do my postgraduate studies. You come out, you've got a double degree from Oxford and all these things, and you get very nice offers. And you're like thinking, so our revenue is a third of the salary I'm getting. So technically I could take this job, give the company half and you're still winning. And early on you think about those things. But for me, and still true today, is I want to ensure that the things I'm doing, I'm uniquely placed to do.
Sure.
I mean, even the work we do now within government and investing and tech, it's because I've uniquely been placed to do so given my experience. And so I asked myself the simple question of, I look back in my life and asked myself, did I have a unique impact or let's say outcome that was Melbourne specific? And I felt that at that point in time, I had done well and built some credibility in my corporate work that if things really failed, I could have actually maybe had gone back to that particular role. I thought to myself, let me take the risk. But also what you quickly realize is then you have employees and their families. And yes, maybe, Angela can be like, look, mom, dad, take out the bunk bed and be like, look, we're back home now. But the reality is that wasn't the case. And I think it's often why I value the importance of partnership, because when you're up, someone's down. When someone's down, someone's up. And so for me, having spent so much time building, my career goal is to create 100,000 sustainable jobs. And so that impetus of hey, we can actually scale this business. We can do something bigger. And I think it wasn't clear at the beginning and it was a tough decision, but it was about saying look, given how young I am, whatever, no kids and so forth, being able to just take that risk was important, but also to have the opportunity, which I think was important. Because not everyone would have the opportunity as a young South African to find their way in Silicon Valley and actually be building among some of the best. I mean, when you're having dinner with, Brian Chesky at Airbnb or Peter Thiel, you're like, okay, well, these guys, I can take them. Or at least let me, like I can build,
What did you learn from being in that environment? Because, I mean, Oxford is already one place that would really like sharpen your capacities, but another very competitive, but also high energy and fascinating environment must be like the heart of Silicon Valley. Airbnb people, founder of OpenAI, to be. What did you learn there that maybe you didn't even learn at Oxford?
Yeah, and it's interesting because Oxford, so even I did my master's in technology, I was like, I'm going to learn technology, but it's very much theoretical. And I think I was speaking to a friend earlier today, their daughter's currently studying in the UK, and university towns tend to be a bubble. And so there's only so much you can exposure there. What I think being in Silicon Valley was, one, that failure is not fatal, which isn't true in all like circumstances. I think in African culture, often if you do fail, it's like, oh my gosh, it's a failure. And I think there's an optimism where someone can be like, look, I'm 2 failures away from my $1 billion company. And you're like, delusional, but, and it's that confidence you just show up with because people around you have done it. And so that point of reference is different. But I think also in the same vein, what was quite clear is that the bias towards execution and how execution trumps ideas. Because often, growing up, you think like, my idea is everything. I want to share my idea. It's almost like, in Afrikaans, like a klein noda, like an heirloom, like it's mine. And so it's one of those things which, when you realize you can have a great idea, everyone has Uber for X, X for Y. Sure. But those who out-execute with speed are the ones that ultimately win. With the overlay of learning, because you can make mistakes and burn lots of capital, as we realize in some instances.
Sure.
But definitely that point of bias towards action, I think is a hallmark. And a focused mind executing at the speed of light can't be defeated.
You said something to me that stuck with me for a long time, where you were like, talking about the Go1 thing, you just been valued at $1 billion. The SoftBank deal had come in. And I asked you then what you'd learned about that, and you said it takes the same amount of energy to do something big as it does to do something small. So you might as well do something big.
And that still remains true. Because the reality is this, and I have the privilege of, on the VC side, working with my startups and then serving on listed boards of big companies. And look, all CEOs are dealing with people issues. Like it's all the same stuff. And so if you're going to not sleep, rather not sleep for something that's at scale and actually makes sense. And I think what you realize is that it takes the same amount of effort and the same amount of headache.
That's so interesting, because one would think that like to get to $1 billion valuation, you somehow need to find an extra 24 hours on top of it. Like, but it's the same as $1 million.
Literally.
Yeah.
And I think that's often when you realize that you ask yourself, what can I be doing differently in how I run my day, how I think about my work, how I manage my teams to get there? And I think to your point on Silicon Valley, it's about knowing that somebody else has done it. And that's why often when you find that, like even in venture capital now, some of the biggest, call it unicorn founders, even in Africa, often people that had studied abroad and seen something happen there and they came back and did it. And so often your frame of reference is so important. That's why I would argue even platforms like this one are important, because it shows that what can be possible, people that are from my country or my context.
Absolutely. And part of what we're doing is trying to excite people who are going to be the next shapers of this economy. And part of that is, the entrepreneurs, the investors reframing and shifting their mindsets, out of this negativity cycle, particularly in South Africa. I'm interested on that note. We've been speaking about it takes the same amount of effort to do a big thing than a small thing. And you mentioned, optimizing your day. This is something I'm very interested in for myself, but I'm pretty sure you've probably thought about this a lot, but I've actually never asked you, like, how do you think about your day and trying to get the most out of it? If we are building big, and we all have the same 24 hours, how do we optimize that 24 hours, and how do you optimize it?
I think how I feel about my day has actually evolved over time as well. You go from the point of where you're trying to, put things in a diary, maximize your day. You've got everything slotted in, you maximize 24 hours. And that means you're getting the most from your day. The question is, how you're spending your time in those hours and in that day that are next important. And so for me, it's also that discipline of saying, if I look at my diary today and I look at it a year ago or 2 years ago, am I doing the same things? Am I and to see if I'm growing as a person? Because having a regimented schedule makes sense. Like, we'll wake up, we go to gym, like all those things are true. But it's almost things like how do you actually think about the quality of the time you're spending on those things? I think for me, that's where, when I reflect on my day now, it's about almost making sure that, not necessarily that, yes, I'm getting things done, but almost what's the quality of work I'm actually getting done? And I think that's where I've tried to keep myself very honest, but also in the same vein, very intentional about putting time in my diary. So like I will, for example, say there's certain meetings I won't take before 12, just because I know when I'm best being able to think versus not think versus apply myself in different ways. Or just being very diligent about saying, hey, I want to make sure I go to gym. And so I'm going to put that in the diary and block that out. And I find that to be the best way to manage it. But that being said, also what I realize, and I also feel a bit lazy these days. I mean, like I feel like I'm a night person. And I get lots of messages about the importance of sleep. And I feel like I'm just being stalked now around like, sleep better. But I'm very big on listening to my body as well. And so I try to do that, but in the same vein, look, we've got things to get done. And so very intentional about trying to, at least on the day level, think through how do I do the most valuable things with the time that I have.
It's actually quite interesting also from the perspective of a business, where it's often this idea that we should, or a business should be busy all the time. But how is the quality of the productivity for that business in that time? And rethinking entrepreneurship from a time quality perspective rather than just a time perspective.
I think entrepreneurship is so important because often as a CEO, if you don't feel busy, you'll feel like you aren't working or it feels too comfortable, I'm chilling. But often your role, even as a manager in a company, it's about how do you enable those below you to achieve success, given there's aligned objectives and budgets and so forth. And so your goal is actually to be clearing roadblocks and clearing and sorting things out, providing leadership. It's almost those key touch points. If you don't have the space for that, you won't be able to offer that guidance that is the magic that is in those moments. And so for me, it's about also being intentional about creating that space. Where if a CEO of a portfolio company calls me, I can take that call. As opposed to being like, okay, now I'll call you back tomorrow because I'm just chock-a-blocked. And so also being intentional about how you create that space to actually come in and deep dive and tap in and out of certain things.
That's so interesting because one of the things I've been thinking about in terms of my own life when you talk about that space is sometimes that space is what enables the insight to come or the breakthrough to come. So you might be working really busily and getting the next task done, but you never have a breakthrough. And I was listening to this podcast where they were talking about how many people get ideas in the shower, because it's the only place in a day where you're not doing. And if you can create those spaces, you might be able to do more or be more optimal. If you can create that space.
I think it's intentionality again. It's about how do you almost intentionally create those spaces. So, for example, in the shower or the morning meditation, but even as an organization, in terms of like, in some financial services companies in South Africa, they'll actually say on Friday we don't take any meetings. It's our think day. And like and you take that hit. I mean, even at Google, something that Sergey came up with was around like thinking about budgeting 70-20-10, where that 10% is like we're going to spend on like some wild moonshot things, and you ingrain that in the culture of an organization, but also in yourself. And I think again, it's about intentionally creating space for magic to happen, which I think is the key thing there.
Absolutely. So to circle back to the Go1 journey, just to tie a bow on that, one of the things I'm fascinated in is like that moment when the unicorn status arrived. Can you talk us through that? Because so few, dare I say, I don't think any young Black South Africans have ever been in a place where they're like, I'm a co-founder of $1 billion company. Like, what does that feel like, and what did it feel like for you at the time?
It's fascinating because obviously when you are fundraising and going through the motions, it's more like the art of negotiation. You're going on terms. I mean, valuations going up. Someone's saying, no, don't end this terms. And so there's almost like, we got the deal done and you landed there. And like, and you never count it till it's happened, right? It's like, so obviously, you do negotiations, you do the DD and then like the money hits the account, then the announcement happens, right? And so from that perspective, when the announcement happens, everyone's like, oh my gosh, congratulations. But like, you actually had that moment of like, wow, okay. I remember like, sitting with my co-founders when we finally closed that round, because that round was led by SoftBank in 2021.
That was your Series D round, right?
That was our Series D. Yes, it was our first Series D, exactly. And it was interesting because it wasn't a round that we actually had planned to do. In that we had run our Series C. We were growing well. COVID had happened. Some of our clients didn't work out. Many accelerated. I think we grew quite strong third time by focusing on our core knitting as a business. It was almost opportunistic where one of our investors was like, look, we would like to reinvest more into Go1. Like, we don't need to use the capital. And through those conversations, we realized there was a lot more and more interest. And so we ended up having an oversubscribed round by over $100 million that you were like not planning for. But in the same vein, we're very diligent about saying, like, I remember I used to run say look, if we had another $100 million, what would we do with it? Like, because we just take money and sit on it because we were very capital efficient in our business. And so being intentional about it was so important. So by the time it happens, you're like, okay, we're there. But it's also very humbling when you think about that scale because, you know, often when you're building, you don't take a moment to take a step back and look at the journey. Yeah. Because as an entrepreneur, you always feel like you're firefighting. Sure. Like, because like, and I was talking to Andrew, my partner, the other day, and the things that would like keep us up at night on day one, like when we were like at Oxford trying to like bootstrap things or whatever, and like now it's chalk and cheese, but it still feel like you're like that pain. And definitely very humbling as well though, because getting a $1 billion valuation means that someone external sees the value of what you're doing to that level. Sure. And that's a significant level. And so it's very humbling, but in the same vein, what it meant for us in terms of that capital was then to unlock further our vision of trying to skill 1 billion people. And I think for me, even on that particular journey, you know, the proudest thing for us, even throughout Go1, even today, has been, yes, about the capital we've raised and the valuation, but I think the people we've been able to impact. Because whilst we only have like, you know, under 700 employees in the business, the reality is that, you know, and Go1, especially now with Blinkist in our fold, you know, every second, 3 learning resources are completed on our platform. And so that is over 100 million engagements of learning courses completed every single year, which is incredible. And to think where we started, you know, in our small 2-bedroom place, 5 of us in Silicon Valley, during my Combinator, that's the proudest part. Yeah. But we definitely know that the capital and the partners have enabled us to get there. And I think that was very humbling.
What lesson stuck with you on the other side of the unicorn valuation?
I think definitely the importance of humility and realizing that it was day one again. Not only because we still see ourselves or saw ourselves as a startup, but also because that injection of capital, that milestone attracts with it different things. Oh yeah. And so you're going into uncharted territory again. Sure. And so not having the hubris of saying, oh no, because I've gotten here, look at me, I've got the biggest sandcastle. But humility of like, okay, there's a higher level of care, responsibility and scale in one's thinking.
Yeah. What does it come with? Like when the media cycle starts and people start learning, you know, the scale of this thing, people are like, okay, so Melvyn Silicon Valley Joel actually was not a Joel.
It was interesting because Go1 is predominantly B2B, except for Blinkist and others, which have their own brands. And so the issue is people didn't really know the scale of what we're doing. And, you know, we had lots of business outside of South Africa as well. And like, you know, I was working from coffee shops or the gym. So it's not like, it's a weird one. We're like, okay, this guy's clearly just like, you know, on the beach having some fun. Yeah. And I think definitely does change. I think people also do show up to you differently, which I guess, like, look, I've always been, I believe, the same person. My jokes are funnier these days, though. I don't know if that's correlation versus causality.
That remains to be verified.
But I definitely feel, so I think there definitely is that sense of like awareness of like now you're unicorn and people do show up differently towards you. Yeah, sure. I mean, more relatives want more money for certain things.
Hey, suddenly. I wonder what that family WhatsApp group was like, man.
But no, look, we're very fortunate. I think, you know, we have a very large extended family, a very close nuclear family. And so from that perspective, we've always been intentional about supporting, you know, the broader family.
Did you get DMs like, hey, it's been 10 years. How are you?
They're friends I've reconnected with who I haven't seen in some time, which was always fascinating. So that does happen. But I think more importantly, also, what I value though is also the ability to speak with more command and respect. Yeah. Because I think often, I mentioned earlier, the importance of sharing one's journey and also sharing school fees and paying it forward. And so to some of the communities I'm a part of, just the ability to share school fees and not from a place of like, oh, I read a book or I heard someone say it, but actually like, look, these things that practically helped me in my journey. And these have been the early fruits of that particular usage. And I think for me, that's where I've been very grateful because it allows you to speak with more difference to some extent.
So I was watching various interviews of yours before this, and there was one moment that stood out for me, which was that while you were trying to raise funds for Go1 in the early stages, you battled, especially in South Africa, to convince people to put capital behind you. And here I am thinking like Rhodes Scholar, St. John's, Goldman Sachs, BCG, 2 master's degrees, Y Combinator. And you still couldn't convince people to part with and now it's gone on to be a unicorn. Like that blows my mind, and also speaks to some of the things we need to unlock in this economy, and the difficulty of accessing capital as a young investor in South Africa.
Yeah, it's so true, and I think things have changed, but somewhat they remain the same. Because yes, to your point, I mean, one would argue that with that you should be able to raise money. My parents said, go to school, do hard work, and work hard, and you'll be okay. And like, I mean, I did all that stuff, and
every post, yeah.
And look, maybe I'm just a bad salesperson. I need to work on my pitch. But I think definitely it was hard.
SoftBank disagrees.
I think definitely it was hard. Just because you think like, but what more could I have done? The business, and like we didn't have revenue at that point. It wasn't like we had an idea, like saying, "Hey guys, like we've got some early clients, like let's chat." And look, mindset changes. I think also in South Africa, there's a lot more that we can do to enable entrepreneurship, not only and venture capital and SMMEs in terms of funding, support, and also understanding. I think it's the art of the possible. Like, and I think we need to also tell the stories of successful entrepreneurs, but also successful investors, because no one is sharing. I mean, so. We saw the news yesterday, actually, where there was a big fintech transaction that took place. And I actually bumped into one of the investors coming in. And, we don't celebrate those early local investors that took the risk and backed those entrepreneurs. Often the stories are being told by the international funds who are good at marketing. And so often we think like, oh no, I would never have known about that transaction. I couldn't have backed that entrepreneur. These are the very people who are probably in our schools, in our WeWorks and so forth. And so I think that's where there's a point around how do you share those success stories so people know it is possible.
Absolutely. Can we turn our attention to, your views on the next phase for South Africa and its economy? What do you think we need to do to unlock that next trajectory for this economy? So much potential. We've been through, let's say, a less than perfect time recently. How do we get this economy booming and maybe even one day on the trajectory for, punching above our weight again?
Yeah. And this is where I also like the concept of the biography and learning from other people. Because the path that we're on as a country, economy-wise, development-wise, someone has been there before. Absolutely. In different contexts. Yeah. And the realization is that we also can't do it alone. And from that perspective, I think we've done some really good work as a country around some key policy elements, whether that's in the energy side, with the transformation, then bringing in some private sector capital, the work in Transnet and logistics. I mean, just being able to open up that to more so private sector participation and trying to work some of those things there, to even basic things like now we have a digital nomad visa and we're doing some work on the electronic travel authority as well. So the things that actually have come to fruition. And, that's some of the work, which we're doing now. The president was interesting where I think it's also about building that credibility, not only as a government, but as a country, for the international community. Because something which has always been true, reading, again, biographies. Again, if you think about the greats of African entrepreneurs who've transformed economies, whether it was the Johan Ruperts or Motsepe or Oppenheimer, or even like, Strive north of the border, like all of them, exactly, they were all able to bring in foreign or international capital and expertise to bring to bear in African context. All of them.
Interesting.
Par exception. And so the realization is that we also, if you want to grow beyond our current frontier, not saying it's the only thing, but we do need to be able to have where we're in the world and the external world thinks that South Africa is a place to be and invest and to grow. I remember when we were preparing for Davos early this year, and South Africa had a fairly large delegation from both public and private sector. And, and that was my first Davos experience. But, hearing some of the people who've been there a few times, almost like South Africa is one of those cases where there's so much excitement, but never follow through. It's almost rising. And for the first time, I think this year we had some tangible things to show around ESCOM and so forth and the policy put in place. But I think what we need to do now is like we've gone from, I guess, policy structure to policy tools. So I think things have been laid down. I think the key thing now is execution. And I almost think transparent execution. Because think about like in any organization, even like a listed company, you know, when the market believes that you're credible, whether you go up or down, how you communicate, how you engage with the world is important. And so that's why I really appreciate the work that the presidency has been doing for a long time in Operation Vulindlela around having a public, transparent dashboard saying, like, look, hey, this is how we're tracking, so we're not doing well. And that almost builds trust and confidence. So people, even external people, even South Africans be like, hey, look, I'm going to invest more of my savings. As a country, I'm going to put more capital to work in the country, make more long-term investments. I'm going to choose a long-term job. I'm going to stay in this country. I'm going to build in this country. And so it goes from both the individual right to the institutional level of support. But I think it comes down to focusing on diligent execution across some of the key areas. I mean, the other work we're doing now is around the digital public infrastructure and saying, how do we learn from other economies like the UK, like Estonia, like India, like Brazil, where they were able to leverage technology to transform their economies, both in terms of how they offered government services, but also in how they enabled innovation in the private sector. Because if we can lower the cost of, you know, doing KYC or accessing services or getting a license in days versus months or minutes versus days, I mean, what that does for an economy, and it's that friction that you don't account for, that I think is so important. And I think that's where the government has a clear intent with the roadmap that we put forward to achieve that. But now it's about that execution. And I think the key thing about execution now is about how do we as a country, SA Inc. come together, you know, across the different public and private sector entities. What does the whole of government initiative look like? And I think we are rowing in the same direction. And I think that's what gives me hope. But I think definitely to your question, the key point now is execution and follow through more than anything else.
You've alluded to your recent appointment. So President Ramaphosa took a very wise decision in appointing you to the Digital Services Unit, I believe it's called, which is really this presidency located initiative to rethink how digital government could work. And you are spearheading that. It's a fascinating time to be in that place because of the technological transformations we're seeing around the world. And there's this view that one of the optimistic views of AI is that it's going to solve a lot of problems at the basic level of governance that, you know, have plagued African economies for a long time. And I wonder, you know, whether you think that is possible going forward, because we're entering a new era. And I think to myself, another way of putting it is, I will believe the AI hype when we can get governance right in South Africa. But we might be able to now, because we're suddenly getting the capacities and the ability to see things in a way that might just unlock a true service delivery revolution if we play our cards right.
That's true. And I think it's not even about reinventing the wheel. I think the power of AI is even at a basic level. Like, and the one thing I love about AI is there's so much competition taking place in the market. That's every single 2 weeks there's a new release with Grok, with Claude, and then you've got Perplexity with Claude, and then you've got OpenAI coming through. And it's good because the consumer wins ultimately, because everyone's competing for a better outcome. But I think there's work to be done at the edge. But even for the basic stuff, I think if you think about government services, like, and it's interesting why, you know, I think about the work we do is so important, because the biggest impact, the biggest spender in the economy is the government. And so if you get government services right and you're able to imbue technologies like AI into how you deliver services, it transforms the economy. It's almost like the way we should get the greatest access to those emerging technologies. But that does require us to then also not only deeply understand the problems we're solving and understand the citizen needs, but also to understand those technologies, because not all of them are relevant. And by no means is AI a panacea, because, you know, some of the issues you've raised are more institutional than they are actually in the structure of the technology and how things are built. I think for me, the biggest insight on this journey has been that digital transformation in government isn't really about tech. You know, it's about people. It's about trust. It's about access. And when you realize that, you build differently and you approach the process differently. I think that's where definitely the key ambition of the roadmap now is, obviously we're first starting with big impact things like social protection and labor markets. But a big learning from other countries in the world is that, you know, you must try to do something for everybody. So yes, the person that may have a driver's license may not be getting a SASSA grant. But the reality is that do something for them as well, because everyone must feel that things are changing. The work we're working with Home Affairs around, you know, the ETA or now we've seen an announcement yesterday regarding the banks coming on board around how do we then improve the biometric coverage in South Africa. And these are things which require, again, public-private partnerships. And so I think everyone realizes the opportunity.
Sure.
And I think it's one of those things where the tide raises all the ships. But I feel that emerging technologies do have a role to play. But also, that being said, they will come with its challenges. There will be bias. There will be displacement of work. There's
questions of privacy.
Exactly. I mean, privacy, reskilling. I mean, like, it's interesting, small things like, we were chatting to some colleagues in public transport earlier. And, like, when you scan your ID card, when you enter, let's say, like a office park or apartment block, whatever it is, the amount of information in that barcode is, like, ridiculous. Like in terms of privacy information, like, your fingerprint, everything is there. And, like, yes, maybe the keys leaked online or something, but, like, it's crazy. So that's why I think, even for the stuff that's already there, it's about thinking, how does one re-architect it to ultimately protect the citizen and the sovereignty of the citizen and the country more broadly. And so I think it's that nexus of different things where you're trying to remain globally relevant, but don't overexpose yourself to risk. Because think about it, like, same way we're talking to some colleagues in the payment space recently. And, when you think about what happened, for example, in Russia, where one day the US said we're going to turn off transactions.
Sure. Yeah.
Swift and you couldn't transact. Now, if you're not in the good books one day and they're like, and I mean, like, 99.7% of our payments happen through the bigger players globally.
Wow.
And so it's almost that question of, like, what does, one, building a redundancy, but also taking fully awareness that there's a level of sovereignty that is required in thinking about these tools that we imbue in our technology.
So important, because part of South Africa's future, the continent's future, it seems to me, is now really getting to a point where we can stand as an economically independent, on our own 2 feet continent or country.
Yes.
And as geopolitics shifts, that sovereignty is becoming increasingly important.
Yes.
And it almost feels like our next mission is, yes, we've got these forms of formal independence, but how do we truly build economic independence in the continent, in South Africa?
And, it's, often the right decision can be right, but you often need a nudge to get there. And I feel like Africa, and even South Africa, has had a series of, whether it's a godsend, the universe speaking, nudges towards that. If you think about, like, COVID and the COVID vaccine and the inequality that we saw there as Africa, and you're like, but aren't we all, humans, humanitarian, and now you're seeing it now with some of the, like, the trade limitations that are taking place and the tariffs, and you're like, actually, we need to do more. When AGOA was under question and renewal, you're like, how much intra-Africa trade can we bolster? And so, yes, African Continental Free Trade Agreement is working on that. There's PAPS, which Africa Export Bank is supporting. And it's about, yes, it's the right thing to do, but there's always been, like, many, like, silos and fiefdoms, and politics always prevails. But I think there's almost a strong push towards that integration. Because I think we're all in this together. And I think it's something which I think we're very much aware of now more than ever.
In terms of what could be achieved with government embracing a technological revolution or shifting its institutions, I get excited, because I'm like,
you need both.
Yeah, well, I bet. Like, you look at international best practice and just, like, being able to access services in one place, for example, which I know is best practice, I think, in a place like India, or they're working on that, where you can take out your phone, it can be a simple phone, but you know what's happening with water, with electricity, maybe with roads. True. There's an easy route to government.
Yes.
That could be something that could really be a game changer if we could get it right.
100%. And not even bring government close to people, but even just the experience of being a citizen in South Africa. I think what has been unlocked through UPI in India, PIX in Brazil on the payment side, or even like ADA on the identity, like just realizing the size of the prize of the work we're doing is very exciting. And I think if everyone had to appreciate what that means in their business or in their day-to-day life, I think it'd be transformative. And I think that's where we have to be intentional about almost coming together and actually engaging with the process. Because yes, not everyone may be a grant recipient. Not everyone may have a driver. Not everyone may have a Malusi certificate that they can go get digitally now.
Yeah,
but I think as you change the culture of how you think about technology or services, really taking, because look, the best companies. So we spoke about biographies earlier. Something that's true across all the greatest entrepreneurs is they focus on their customer and their needs and understanding those particularly well.
Sure.
I mean,
sure.
And I think from that perspective, if you
Government understanding the citizen.
and understanding it, like service design and delivery.
Sure.
I mean, last week we had some of the colleagues who had actually led the initiatives in the UK, in Canada, and in New Zealand. And just sharing some of the insights that they had around, often I thought this was the problem, was actually something else. And so that deeper understanding in the user research requires participation from the citizens. And so for me, that's where I think there's a unique opportunity to really unlock the potential about a citizen-centric approach to government.
It's extremely exciting stuff. I mean, another real opportunity in South Africa right now is the G20 summit is coming to Johannesburg in November this year. Of course, there's the B20 summit, which Standard Bank is a big part of driving. You know, how do you see the importance of G20 and also the role that companies like Standard Bank in South Africa can play in this moment where the world is coming to our doorstep?
And, you know, it's been so beautiful to watch how the country has rallied behind the G20. And I think from both a public and private partnership. So I was speaking to an exec, actually Standard Bank earlier today, and they were just saying about how even just the ability to engage with partners and peers internationally and just, you know, share ideas and actually be able to collaborate, even beyond our term where we are heading up the G20 as South Africa, I think it's definitely been a rallying cry from that perspective. It's almost like a give and take. But I think definitely seeing all the public and private sector come together has been incredible. I mean, because you've got the G20, you've got the B20, there's also Startup 20 as an example. And so it's broad participation and it's really galvanizing the conversation. What's also fascinating is that you're having conversations about South Africa in the context of the world, which is really fascinating because you have to ask yourself, okay, this recommendation makes sense here. What does it mean for the global context? How do we change it? And for me, that muscle is so important. And I think those conversations are so important. So I think leading up to G20, it's a very unique opportunity. Yes, it's a crescendo. What's great to see is all these side meetings and things taking place where you actually are seeing real outcomes and dialogue taking place. And, you know, they often say, like, you know, you have to almost go outside of the country to speak to your neighbor. And so I find that what the G20 and B20 has enabled is those robust conversations, but in the local context.
Absolutely. Brother, what is exciting you in terms of your own trajectory and journey going forward in this economy of ours?
I think it's a great time to be in South Africa. I think, you know, there's lots of talk around, you know, brain drain, people leaving to go abroad, Australia, US, Canada. It's such a great time to be in South Africa and be building in South Africa. There's so much potential. Having, you know, had teams in over 20 countries, lived in over 40 of like over the time I've been building, you just appreciate just the opportunity that we have because it's almost like you have the best Lego blocks in the world and you can choose how you want to stack them. And from that perspective, it's really our opportunity in terms of thinking through how we execute towards that particular goal. And so that's very exciting.
Well, Melvyn Lubega, thank you for taking us through some of your thoughts, your journey. It's been great to provide something of a brief biography of you today.
To be penned.
Indeed. And, you know, just kudos for the work you're doing in this economy, in the African economy and globally. And we look forward to all that you'll be doing to unleash growth and opportunity and get to that 100,000 sustainable jobs mark going forward.
Thank you. And thank you for creating platforms like this. I think it's so important that we're able to not only share our journeys, but also speak about what's possible in South Africa and the South African economy. Because I think it's often spaces where you don't necessarily get that kind of good news. And headlines may be misleading, but it's about taking a step back and saying, where are we? And so thank you for creating this opportunity, but I think more so platforms like these as well.
For sure. Thank you, sir.
No, thank you.
And thank you for watching yet another episode of In This Economy, brought to you by Standard Bank Private, along with SMWX. Comment down below. We'd love to hear from you. Did you get inspiration from hearing from one of our country's most dynamic and incisive entrepreneurs? What nuggets of wisdom did you pull out that you didn't know before? What are your thoughts on the trajectory of this economy and how we take it forward? Like, share, subscribe, help us reach our next milestone of 300,000 subscribers, and keep it locked on SMWX. Aye.